In modern society, people often depend on refrigeration, plastic packaging, and chemicals to keep food from spoiling. Yet hundreds of years before refrigerators were invented, Native Americans had already developed highly effective preservation techniques that transformed short harvest seasons into year-round food security. They not only created methods that could extend the life of food for decades, but also built a balanced nutritional system that ensured survival through harsh winters and long migrations. The uniqueness of Native American food preservation didn't lie in modern tools, but in their deep understanding of nature and knowledge passed down through generations. Their core principles can be summed up in 4 main points. First, moisture was the #1 enemy. Most bacteria and mold need water to grow, so removing every drop of moisture from food was the key. Native Americans developed multiple techniques: sun-drying, wind-drying, smoking, and even using the natural freeze-thaw cycles of high mountain regions. Once food was dried to the point of becoming hard as stone, bacteria simply could not survive. Second, they used fat and natural shells as protective seals. In pemmican, rendered animal fat coated the dried meat, creating an airtight, moisture-proof barrier. For nuts, the hard shell itself was nature's perfect, biological packaging. As long as the shell stayed intact, the nut inside could remain fresh for years. Third, they combined foods intelligently to balance nutrition. Corn and beans were the perfect example. Corn lacked certain amino acids that beans contained, and beans lacked nutrients that corn supplied. Together, they formed a complete protein equal to meat. This reflected a philosophy of eating well, rather than just eating enough. Fourth, they relied on natural, locally available materials for storage. Clay jars, pine pitch sealed baskets, waterproof birch bark containers, and underground pits lined with bark all created dry, cool, insect-resistant environments. These simple yet highly effective methods allowed food to be stored for many years. In short, the core principles were a combination of dehydration, natural sealing, nutritional balance, and safe storage. By following these 4 rules, Native Americans built a sustainable food system capable of defying both time and harsh natural conditions. 1. Pemmican. The original energy bar pemmican is perhaps the clearest example of the principle: remove all moisture and seal with fat. Native Americans sliced buffalo, elk, or deer meat into thin strips, dried it completely, and pounded it into powder. This powder was mixed with rendered fat, sometimes with dried berries added, forming a dense block of nutrition. The fat acted like a natural preservative, locking out air and moisture and keeping the mixture safe for years, even decades. Pemmican was incredibly calorie-dense. Just a handful could fuel a warrior for days on the move. For the Plains tribes, it was a survival strategy as much as a food, light enough to carry on horseback yet powerful enough to sustain long journeys. Compared to today's protein bars, pemmican was more efficient, more natural, and more enduring. 2. Dried corn. The foundation of civilization's dried corn was the survival insurance policy of countless tribes. The principle was strict: harvest at the right moment, dry completely, and store securely. Ears were picked at maturity, kernels were dried until rock hard, and moisture content dropped below 14%, a level too low for bacteria or mold to survive. These kernels could then be stored for decades in clay pots, pine pitch sealed baskets, or underground pits. The genius of dried corn was its versatility. It could be ground into flour, boiled into soup, or even popped over fire for a crunchy snack. While modern people argue over whether cereal is still safe a few weeks past its expiration date, Native Americans had already mastered corn that laughed at the very concept of spoiling. Dried corn embodies the timeless truth: moisture means death, dryness means survival. 3. Nixtamalized corn. A biochemical breakthrough. Native Americans didn't just dry corn. They transformed it chemically through a process now known as nixtamalization. Kernels were soaked and boiled in an alkaline solution made from wood ash or lime. This broke down the tough hulls, released bound niacin, vitamin B3, and made the grain easier to digest. Preservation also improved, since the alkaline treatment killed bacteria and prevented rancidity. The brilliance here lies in the principle: process food not just for preservation, but for nutrition. Centuries before modern science understood biochemistry, Native Americans had discovered a way to prevent deficiencies like pellagra and to enhance the lifespan of stored corn. Nixtamalized corn was a true nutritional revolution, proving that preservation could mean healthier food, not just longer-lasting food. 4. Dried beans, the perfect partner for corn. If corn was the foundation, beans were the perfect complement. The principle at work: dehydrate completely and combine intelligently. Beans were laid out on mats until every seed rattled dry, then sealed in clay jars, resin-lined baskets, or underground caches. Properly dried beans could last for years, some varieties almost indestructible in storage. Nutritionally, they paired perfectly with corn, supplying amino acids that corn lacked and forming complete proteins when eaten together. Rehydrated beans cooked into tender, nutritious meals that tasted fresh even after years of storage. This wasn't just preservation, it was foresight. By combining corn and beans, Native Americans built a sustainable protein source rivaling meat, all while following the core rules: remove moisture, store naturally, and balance nutrition. 5. Jerky, portable protein. Fresh meat spoils fast, but Native Americans mastered turning it into jerky, protein on the move. The principle was simple: choose lean cuts, trim all fat, slice thin, and dry thoroughly. Fat was the enemy because it spoiled quickly, so only the leanest strips were used. The meat was hung on racks in the sun or smoked over low fires until it was so dry it snapped when bent. Stored in parfleche bags made from rawhide, jerky could last for years, far outliving the person who made it. Compared to modern beef jerky, which expires within a year or two, traditional jerky was almost eternal. It was light, durable, and nutritionally dense, perfect for hunters and travelers. Once again, the timeless lesson applies: keep it lean, keep it dry, and it will keep you alive. 6. Nuts, nature's perfect packaging. Hickory nuts, walnuts, pecans, and acorns were all treated as treasures by Native Americans. The principle here: use the shell as nature's packaging. The hard shells had evolved to keep oxygen, moisture, and insects away from the nutritious kernel inside. As long as the shell stayed intact, the nut could last for years. Harvest timing was crucial. Nuts were collected right after falling, before ground moisture could seep in. Some, like acorns, required leaching with water to remove bitter tannins before being ground into meal. Stored in clay jars or pitch-sealed baskets, nuts remained fresh for decades. Rich in fats and protein, they provided dense energy when other foods ran low. The lesson is simple: when nature gives you packaging, use it wisely. 7. Sunflower seeds, America's original superfood. Long before the world knew them, Native Americans domesticated sunflowers and perfected their preservation. The principle: dry completely, stabilize the oils, and store securely. Harvesters cut the entire flower head, dried it thoroughly, then beat or rubbed it to release the seeds. Roasting was often the final step, driving out moisture and stabilizing the oil content, which might otherwise turn rancid. Stored in clay pots or sealed baskets, the seeds lasted for years, providing vital calories and healthy fats. Sunflower seeds were not just snacks, they were fuel, medicine, and oil all in one. By combining careful harvest timing with simple roasting, Native Americans unlocked a food that could outlast empires. This shows how the core principle of dehydration plus protection applies even to oily, perishable foods. 8. Dried berries, nature's vitamin pills. Cranberries, chokecherries, blueberries, and strawberries were transformed into dried stores of nutrition. The principle: remove water quickly, take advantage of natural chemistry, and store well. Cranberries, with their waxy coating and high acidity, dried beautifully and resisted spoilage almost indefinitely. Chokecherries were often crushed whole, pits and all, then pressed into flat cakes that dried rock hard, ready to be broken apart when needed. Stored in birch bark containers or tightly woven baskets, dried berries could last for decades. Their vitamin C and antioxidants prevented scurvy and kept communities healthy through long winters. While European sailors perished on long voyages, Native Americans thrived on berries dried months or even years before. Here we see the principle in action. Dry fast, store smart, preserve nutrition. 9. Maple sugar bricks, crystallized energy in the Great Lakes and Northeast. Native Americans discovered that maple sap could be boiled down into solid sugar blocks. The principle: concentrate sugars, eliminate water, and seal away moisture. It took 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup, and even more boiling to produce hard crystals. These sugar bricks, once fully crystallized, were virtually immortal. Sugar at that concentration is naturally antimicrobial. Wrapped in birch bark or stored in wooden boxes, they provided instant energy during harsh winters. While Europeans paid fortunes for imported sugar, Native Americans had their own renewable, local sweetener that lasted indefinitely. Maple sugar demonstrates how the principle of intensive processing to drive out every drop of water created one of the most durable energy sources in history. 10. Prairie turnips, hidden treasures underground across the Great Plains. Prairie turnips were the underground, secret stash of survival. The principle: harvest at peak nutrition, slice thin, dry completely, and store in protective containers. Gathered in early summer before becoming woody, the roots were peeled, sliced, and laid on willow racks to dry until they were translucent and rock hard. Once dry, they were stored in clay jars or lined pits where they could last for decades. Prairie turnips provided carbohydrates, protein, and vitamins when other foods were scarce. They were light, nutritious, and could be rehydrated easily for soups and stews. What looks like a small, unremarkable root was in fact a lifeline, proof that by following the principle of timing and total dehydration, Native Americans could transform fragile plants into long-term survival food. 11. Wild rice, the aquatic grain of the North. Wild rice, which isn't actually rice but a grass seed, was one of the most important grains of the Great Lakes tribes. The principle: harvest at the perfect time, dry thoroughly, and store in sealed containers. Harvest required teamwork. One person paddled the canoe while another gently bent the stalks and knocked ripe seeds into the boat. Too early, and the grains weren't ready. Too late, and the seeds fell into the water. After harvesting, wild rice was sun-dried, then parched over fires and hulled by foot trampling in lined pits. Properly stored in birch bark or clay containers, it could last for years. Nutritionally, wild rice contained more protein than ordinary rice, making it a superior survival grain. This food proves how the principle of timing plus careful dehydration could turn a fragile water plant into a durable, protein-rich staple. 12. Chokecherry cakes, the original fruit leather chokecherries, naturally bitter, were turned into dense, nutritious cakes. The principle: use the whole fruit, dry thoroughly, and store securely. Fully ripe chokecherries were crushed, including skins and pits, then pressed into flat patties about an inch thick. These were dried on bark sheets until they hardened into dark, stone-like cakes. Wrapped in animal skins or stored in bark containers, chokecherry cakes could last for decades. Beyond their longevity, they provided antioxidants, vitamin C, and essential nutrients that kept people healthy through long winters. What might seem like an unpleasant fruit was transformed into a superfood, showing the principle of waste nothing, process smart, and preserve nutrition. 13. Smoked fish flavor and preservation combined for tribes near rivers, lakes, and coasts. Smoked fish was essential. The principle: remove water with smoke and heat, control temperature, and seal away moisture. Fresh fish were cleaned, split, and hung on racks over slow, smoky fires. The smoke both dried and coated the fish with natural antimicrobials. The key was temperature. Too hot and the fish cooked. Too cool and bacteria grew. Done properly, smoked fish became firm, leathery, and safe for long-term storage. Kept in clay jars or bark containers, it could last months or even years. Compared to modern smoked fish that spoils within weeks without refrigeration, traditional smoked fish was virtually immortal. It is a perfect example of how smoke, patience, and skill preserved vital protein. 14. Dried shellfish, coastal survival, food along the ocean coasts, mussels and clams were preserved by drying. The principle: clean thoroughly, boil or smoke, dry completely, and store. Fresh shellfish spoil within hours, so they had to be processed immediately. The meat was boiled to kill bacteria, then spread on racks to air dry or smoke dry until brittle. Stored in baskets or jars, dried shellfish could last for years, providing concentrated protein and minerals. This was especially valuable for trade with inland tribes who had no access to seafood. Dried shellfish turned a highly perishable food into a portable treasure, proving once again that removing water is the key to defeating time. 15. Parched corn. The ancient trail snack. Parched corn was the original travel food. Lightweight, crunchy, and long-lasting. The principle: apply heat to drive out all moisture, stir constantly, and store airtight. Mature kernels were removed from the cob, cleaned, and roasted over fire until they puffed slightly and became dry and crunchy. Once cooled, they were sealed in pots or baskets where they could keep for years. Parched corn was eaten as is, boiled into porridge, or ground into flour for bread. It was incredibly calorie-dense, giving sustained energy for long journeys. If pemmican was the meat-based energy bar, parched corn was the grain-based trail mix. Together, they exemplify the principle: dry it, seal it, and it will feed you for generations. 16. Ground meal. The ancient flour. Grinding grains, acorns, or dried corn into meal gave Native Americans flexibility in cooking. The principle: dry thoroughly before grinding, protect from moisture, and store securely. Using stone mortars and pestles, they crushed kernels into fine powders, then sifted for different textures. Because ground meal had a larger surface area, it spoiled more easily, so airtight clay jars or pine pitch-lined baskets were essential. Properly stored, the meal could last for years. It could be stirred into soups, baked into bread, or mixed with water for quick porridge. This shows the principle of processing to increase versatility while relying on careful storage. Even without metal mills or modern bags, Native Americans made flour that could outlast entire civilizations. 17. Dried squash strips. Year-round vegetable squash, heavy with water, spoiled quickly, unless it was dried into strips. The principle: slice thin, dry in sun and wind, and store hanging or sealed. Squash was cut into long ribbons, laid on racks, and turned regularly until leathery and flexible. Strips were often braided into ropes and hung in dry spaces, safe from ground moisture and pests. In this form, squash retained much of its vitamins and minerals, and could be rehydrated for soups or stews during winter. Dried squash reflects the principle of turning seasonal abundance into long-term security, ensuring that vegetables were available long after harvest. 18. Freeze-dried potatoes, chuno, a mountain miracle. High in the Andes and mountain regions, tribes created chuno, the world's first freeze-dried food. The principle: use natural freeze-thaw cycles to remove moisture. Potatoes were left outside to freeze solid at night, then thaw and dry under the sun by day. People trampled them to release water, repeating the process until the tubers were rock-hard, black, and shriveled. Though unappealing in appearance, chuno could last for decades if kept dry. It retained nutrition and could be rehydrated into soups or stews. This process anticipated modern freeze-drying technology by centuries, proving that adapting to natural conditions can achieve scientific miracles. 19. Wild onions and garlic. The immortal seasoning and medicine wild onions and garlic were not only seasonings but also natural medicines for Native Americans. After harvesting, the bulbs were cleaned, tied into bundles, and hung in well-ventilated places for several weeks until their outer layers became crisp and dry. The core principle applied here was air dry to remove moisture, store in ventilated conditions, and preserve medicinal qualities. In their dried state, the bulbs could last for years, and over time, their flavor became stronger and their medicinal properties more potent. Native Americans used them to fight colds, treat infections, and enhance the taste of food. This demonstrates that preservation wasn't only about staying fed, but also about maintaining a year-round supply of medicine and spices. By relying on dehydration and natural storage, wild onions and garlic became a dual resource, both food and medicine. The food system of Native Americans was not only an art of preservation but also a profound philosophy of sustainable survival. First, they lived in harmony with nature, making use of sunlight, wind, wood ash, tree bark, clay, and natural shells to protect food without harming the environment. Second, their system provided outstanding food security. Every item, whether pemmican, corn, beans, smoked fish, or pine nuts, contributed to a food bank that could last for decades, helping communities endure harsh winters and long droughts. Equally important was their intelligent approach to balanced nutrition. Corn and beans together formed complete proteins, dried berries supplied vitamin C, while wild onions and garlic acted as natural antibiotics. Beyond practical survival, this system was also a cultural legacy, with knowledge passed down through generations, proving timeless wisdom and resilience. Today, in an era of climate change and global food insecurity, these simple yet enduring principles offer a vital lesson in sustainability. They remind us that true food security does not always come from technology, but from understanding natural cycles and respecting the land.